Good afternoon, Star Sailors, and welcome to the first of our North Sails webinar series for the Star class. My name is Prof O'Connell, and I'm coming to you from North Sails Ireland here in sunny Dublin. And we're really delighted to bring this first North Sails webinar to you for the amazing class. We've got two fantastic panelists here. My colleagues, Eric Doyle. Eric, are you there?
Here, Prof. How you doing? Can you guys hear me all right?
Loud and clear, Eric. Eric,
all right.
Where are you coming? Where are you transmitting to us from?
Right now, I'm in the mighty Midwest of the United States, just outside of Lake Minnetonka in the great state of Minnesota. Fantastic.
Great to have you, Eric. Eric, as we know, guys, is a Star World Champion, multiple North American champion, and a 3 times America's Cup participant in 2003 and 07 with Dennis Connor and with Oracle twice. So brilliant to have you along, Eric. And Eric heads up our Star Class development program, so it's wonderful to have him. And our second panelist is my colleague from North Sails Germany. And big shout out to big Markus Coy. Are you there, Markus?
I'm here. I can hear you loud and clear.
Good man, Markus. And nice to see that you've got a beautiful haircut for today.
Yeah. Just for you guys. I made it nice and shiny.
Fantastic. And Markus is a 5-time Star European champion. So it's really wonderful to have you guys on today. So guys, just to give all of you sailors out there a hello. We all know that it's kind of tough times for a lot of us right now, and we hope that you're all doing okay and that you're getting through these tough times, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be back out in the water sooner rather than later. But stay in touch with us here, and hopefully we'll get through this all together. So we'll just roll into it. We'll try and keep this webinar, guys, to about 60 minutes or so. That seems to be what has worked for us and what's the sort of duration that has worked well so far. Today we're going to talk about the black art of star rig tuning, and it's probably a great discussion point in docks and boat parks all over the star sailing world. So Markus and Eric will go through the technical points of setting up the Star rig. But before we do that, we'll just give a shout out to the Star Class Association. They do a great job trying to keep in touch with the members of the Star Class worldwide. And obviously now it's more important than ever to have the strong class association. So it'll be good to renew your dues if you can for this year if you haven't done so already. And
pay your dues.
The class will keep things running in the background.
Call Geraldine Beal, San Diego. She's a class manager. Pay your dues, join up.
Perfect. Great. So guys, we're going to talk about Star Rig Tune today, and maybe Eric, you might just go through what the agenda is today and this magnificent black and white shot. Who's in that picture there, Eric?
Yeah, this was a great photo Laura found for us, came across. This is, of course, the legendary Lowell North here crewing for him, or sailing with his crew. We're not really sure the date of this photo. I guess it's somewhere in the early 60s.
Right.
Probably sailing off of San Diego. Look at that hiking technique. Markus was talking the other day, maybe we should bring that back. It looks much more comfortable. But I thought we'd do a little Lowell North trivia, Star Class history. We'll throw these questions out first, and because he was such a legend in our class and the sport. You know, he actually started North Sails by building Star sails in his garage. So the first question is, how many times did Lowell win the Star World Championships? And then the bonus question is, we'll see really how deep you can dig in the archives to discover who this is crewing with Lowell, and giving it his all there, hanging over the side.
Very good. Thanks.
If you ask me, it's the wrong way around. It should be first who is crewing, and then how many world titles did he win?
That's
with
okay. Well, we thought the
yeah, I mean,
you'll be able to cheat and look in the log probably to see how many times you won the Worlds, but finding out who's crewing, that's the bonus question.
That is definitely delving into the archives there, guys.
Yeah.
Right. So what are we going to talk about today, Markus?
We're going to talk about rig tuning. Very exciting, isn't it? To be honest, I mean, it is always something which is painful, I would say. You rather want to talk to everybody arriving to the boat park, to a regatta, and see all the guys you haven't seen for a longer time and have a beer or whatever. But on the other hand, if you want to be successful, and that's one of the most reasons why people are coming to the regattas, it is very important to do a proper setup of your rig, because then you know where you are or where you've been actually, and how you can be fast. But that is only this is only possible if you really take your time and do what we're going to talk about in a proper way.
Okay, very good. Right, guys, we'll crack into it. So, and we'll start off here. I guess this is your upper shrouds and your intermediate shrouds, Eric. So what are we looking at here in this diagram on the screen?
Yeah, so the first thing we want to start at with the rig out of the boat, we'll put it on some sawhorses, we'll lay it face up, we'll take the intermediate dimension measurement. You know, we've all seen everybody doing this. We're basically just trying to get that difference between the length of the upper shroud and the intermediate shroud, as that sets the height of the mast in the middle, you know, halfway between the spreaders and the hounds, where the intermediates, halfway between the tip and the spreaders, you know, supports the mast at the hounds, and is very critical to the shape of the upper half of the mainsail. You know, this 75 millimeters is a standard starting point. But that being said, you know, this is something where there's some room to play around with it. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see how we kind of determine very accurately the difference between the two. You know, everybody has their different way to do it. Here, we got this great photo from John McCausland. You know, he takes a sharp instrument, puts it in the bearing surface of the turnbuckle. He puts a little magic marker, black lines on the mast, and then he takes a little scale or something to get equal tension on the uppers and the lowers, and he makes a little mark in the black, and that's the intermediate he's dealing with right now. He's already done the upper, which is on the upper black spot. If you could, so now he ends up with two marks. The top one is for the upper. The lower one is for the intermediate with the turnbuckle, which you can adjust. And kind of an average starting point, you know, is 75 millimeters. And if we go with a standard rig that we kind of get for anybody, that's a good starting point, you know. But what we want to think of is, you know, what does this do to the boat? What does this do to the sail? How do we need to look at this in the overall, you know, picture of sailing the starboat, you know? And the idea of this webinar is that we give you some base starting points, but we give you some ideas to do if you are struggling or you're in a certain condition all the time. Maybe you race where it's very windy all the time. Maybe you race where it's really light. But it's tough to go wrong starting at 75.
And tell me, Markus, obviously the lower mark is the intermediate, and the upper mark is the top mast shroud. And if the intermediate is a little bit longer, to, like, let's say 76 millimeters, what does that do to the mast, and what effect does it have on the shape of the mainsail? Or shorter, Markus?
Yeah. Basically, if your intermediate is longer, so if you go to 76, 77, what is going to happen on the top of the mast is that the part where the intermediate is attached to the mast is going to be sagging a little bit, falling to leeward, which creates a fuller part of the main, like more power in the top of the main. And as we all know, I mean, if you get more power in the top of the main, this is influencing the feeling of power in the boat a lot, because if it's up there, it's even more than it would be easing the outer, which is down below in the boat. So the leverage is higher where you create the power. And so this is a very important measurement. And unfortunately, I would say, many teams don't even know what they have there or haven't checked it for 2 years. I mean, definitely this is nothing you should check every time you rig your boat, but at least you should know where you are. And for sure, when you put up a new mast, you should recheck it, because things are stretching and measurements are changing then. But 75, yes, good ground setting. For lighter crews, maybe a little bit tighter, 74, 73. Or depending on the conditions, if it's light and choppy. I mean, this is very advanced, but you could actually change the intermediate on daily basis if you're really into it, because that is changing a lot of the power in the boat.
It's amazing, really. I mean, I remember from sailing the Star, you know, that 75 millimeter measurement, even though, you know, you think like, what's the difference between 75 and 76? But it does have a significant effect on the mainsail shape up there, doesn't it, Eric?
Yeah, and if you're, you know, maybe if your sail looks a little too full in the top, you know, and you're having too much power, you can't get rid of it, you're kind of struggling, the boat's kind of jammed up and you can't get the head to open and the boat to run, then you might want to think about tightening the intermediates a little bit, you know, if you have a softer mast. You know, that I run the Burton mast, which is very stiff. And a lot of times in California, I'll run 77, 78 on this.
Really?
You know, in a windier venue or a softer rig, you might go as tight as 72 and really flatten out the top of the sail and
Gotcha.
Allow you to sheet harder and make the boat go a little better. Perfect.
Good stuff, guys. So we've done the intermediates at 75 or as a starting point. So the next thing then, we're going to look at the spreader sweep. And Eric, the spreader sweep is the angle that the spreaders kind of angle back, if you like, from perpendicular. And they're adjustable, aren't they, with the little screws on the inboard end of the spreaders?
Yeah. This is the second thing we normally go to after we still don't have the mast in the boat. You know, we've all seen everybody doing it. We add more sweep. If we think the mast is a little stiffer, more sweep allows the mast to bend a little more. When we push the spreaders forward, it straightens out the mast. It restricts the bend in the middle. Yeah, and we've got these little set screws on the inboard of the mast, of the spreader, you know, hidden inside the bracket that we adjust with. And one thing I just want to mention with the set screws and the little turnbuckle on the intermediates is that, you know, you got to make sure you have a little bit of Loctite to get these things to set. You know, the turnbuckles on the intermediates, you know, you need 2 pliers or vice grips to tighten them, but it is possible to tweak those, and we'll actually end up weakening the shaft with the threads on it, and they can end up breaking. So we want to get our measurement close. We want to back the nut off a little bit, put a little Loctite, and then just snug them up. And when we're adjusting the spreader sweep on the spreaders too, we want to put a little Loctite on there so they don't move. You know, on a windy day when everything's shaking around, you know, it can end up changing everything. And that's why, like Markus said, you know, you got to check this stuff periodically, because
I guess of all the boats that we all sail, I mean, the Star spreaders move around so much, don't they? Because they bang backwards going upwind, and then downwinds they flick forward, and then you got the check stays and all that sort of stuff hanging around, Markus. So the principle is that if you sweep the spreaders back more, Markus, it pushes more bend into the rig. Is that the principle?
Yeah, at least it allows the mast to bend more.
Right.
So here are 2 theories. I mean, I'm one of the guys who's going for the 128 kind of. But also other settings or setups are up to 140, which allows the mast to bend more forward, what you just said. And you could also control this forward bend by the check stay. So if you don't want to bend or to let so much mast bend, so don't allow so much mast bend, you just tighten the lowers a little bit, which is relatively taking the 140 back on the spreader angle. But anyway, I mean, this is a little bit personal style, I would say. Range between 128 and 140. And it's a little bit up to what you like. I mean, it's not really that this is fast or slow. It's really how you get along with it. And everybody has a little bit different opinions on this. Just one comment, reading the chat on one eye here. My good old friend Andrew Portfry, Doggy, said that in the old days there was actually adjustable intermediates. Everything is allowed, or more or less nearly everything is allowed on the starboard mast. And I also remember some settings, but it always was too confusing having this adjustable in the boat. You never knew exactly where you were, and most of the teams I know went back to the fixed setting.
Right, very good. And just one thing as well, Markus, obviously if you've got your spreader swept back quite a lot, and that's pushing bend into the rig, which is flattening the mainsail, and then maybe I guess the sailors might be then inclined to pull the check stay harder, you know, to put the shape back in the mainsail. What's the downside to doing that by pulling the check stay? Does it have another effect somewhere else on the boat?
No, it's not really a downside. You have the ability to let the mast bend more forward. If you ask me personally, I don't want to have that much bend. I like the mast quite straight on the bottom, from the bottom or from the deck to the spreaders. I like a quite straight section there. But once again, this is also a little bit your personal setup. I mean, the sail, the M25, which is now the actual sail we're using from North Sails, a new model, is allowing both settings, to be honest. And maybe if you're a lighter crew, you would go for a bigger angle, or if you prefer to have the mast a little bit more upright but more spreader angle, it's affecting a lot, and you can change the system in many ways. So it is not necessary to have 128 or 140. You can change your way, or you can choose your way in there. And it's depending on other factors you're doing on your boat, or tuning on your boat, mast rake and all that.
Good stuff, Markus, good stuff. Right, guys, so we've done the intermediates, you know, we've set up our spreader sweep, and just a little bit of detail here, and this is Johnny Mack's wonderful workshop, and a big shout out to Johnny Mack, who is very kindly put together these photographs for us in the last couple of days, helping us put this presentation together. But the shock cord here, Eric, where exactly is that tied onto, and how do we locate that exactly?
Yeah, nice easy way to check the spreader sweep. You know, you just get a cotter pin, little 1/8 inch shock cord, tie a knot in it, put it in. That's the actual, at the end of the spreader tip there, it goes in where the bolt, which holds your shrouds together, you pop that in there. You know, the rig's face down, and we're trying to line that top edge of the shock cord up with the set screw. If you could point to that little set screw. Wait, go back one slide. Yeah. See that little set screw? We measure from the middle of that set screw straight across. We'll do the same thing on the other side. And yep, right there, our little set screw is what holds the shroud pin in, that holds all the shrouds. So we're looking from the middle of that. We'll do the same thing on the other side, and then, okay, we can go to the next slide.
There you go.
And then we'll measure down from the aft edge of the mast to the top of the shock cord. So you can see this here is at 5 inches, which is a pretty good starting number. Again, if it's a new mast, a lot of times the spreader's set in a little bit after a couple days of sailing. You know, the little set screws will bend the spreader bracket a little bit. The bracket will set in a little bit. The spreaders will, also, it's not surprising if you get a new mast that you're at 5 and you sail for a couple of days and it slides back to 5.5 or something like that.
Gotcha, Eric. And just a comment there from the chat room from our good friend Andrew Doggy Palfrey and Cows. G'day, Doug. And he's saying that Big Fella and him had control of the intermediates on the Barney post, but we'd way too much time in our hands. So that's pretty impressive little techie detail in whatever boat they were sailing then.
They were sailing in the starboard. Those were some trials in the starboard where adjustable intermediates were installed on the mast, but it was too confusing for many teams, and then they didn't know where they were. Yeah, so well, it never really came true.
As you remember way back when, I think, wasn't it Freddie Loof had topmast running backstays as well, if you remember. I don't know if you remember that, Eric, at one point, but Freddie had...
No, I never saw that. I remember these...
And topmasts.
They had that in the old days in the wooden mast to keep them from breaking.
Like the backstays all the way to the top.
Wow.
Yeah, there were some trials in different directions, but to be honest, in the end, it always came back to the settings or to the setup we have now on masts.
Yeah.
But it's always interesting if you see teams trying in different directions.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, that's one thing that's super cool about the Starboat is we can do whatever we want. Everything's kind of migrated to a standard setup, but we could have 2 or 3 sets of spreaders if we wanted, or different shrouds. There's a guy in Seattle who's a aerodynamicist, David Watt. He always comes up with some cool ideas. I remember one year he was sailing, he didn't have any topmast shrouds, all the weight hung on the intermediates at the hounds, and it worked sometimes in some conditions, but not all around. I mean, that's the thing. We've got to, the rig tune has to work through a wide range. If we want to win a major championship, we've got to, they're usually a week long, and you get a wide range of conditions.
Gotcha.
And we need to be able to go through, all the different conditions that we see, all the wind ranges.
All right, guys. So we've done the spreader sweep at 128 millimeters or whatever your setting is, but then obviously we need to check that the spreaders are symmetrical and there's the equal number of sweep on both sides. So Markus, what are we looking at here with this batten on the mast?
Yeah, exactly what you're saying. I mean, you want to have the right distance to the mast, or the angle, which we define between 125 and 140 or 145, whatever you like. But then again, it should be same on both sides, and that's how you do it. You put a sail button on the mast butt. Make sure it's on there in a good way, so it's leaning on the butt all the way. And then you position yourself behind the mast, maybe close one eye, at least that is what I'm doing, and try to look over the batten and compare then the line of the shock cord on the spreaders and see if that is parallel to the sail batten which you installed there.
I'm just going to do my best here now, guys, just to draw along that line.
Yeah, that's very nice, because now we can see it quite clear. And if I want to judge this, I would say the right side is too high. So this, in my opinion, would need a little adjustment. And now it's depending on what angle you measure. Either you want to raise the one side or lower the other side, achieving your distance you want to have. But this is something which is also very important to check. And spreader angle and the symmetric spreader angle of both is something you, in my opinion, should be checked before every time you step your mast in the boat. Intermediate is not that regular, but this is something I would always check before I step the mast.
Very good. Okay, guys. Right. So we've now got symmetric spreaders. With the sweep correct on both sides and the intermediate.
Maybe just one point on that, Prof.
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, very important to get them square, and because otherwise the mast will bend different tack to tack.
Yeah.
and it's already hard enough. So maybe, you know, we have to pull the check stay different tack to tack. And
yeah,
then maybe you're going fast on one tack and slow on the other, and that'll end up screwing you up, you know, with your thought of, you know, hey, why am I gaining here? Why am I losing here? Oh, I'm always, you know, it's hard to tell. Maybe you're slow on one tack and you always think you're going the wrong way, and it'll lead you to make wrong decisions. But the big thing, when we all have a couple masts for our boats probably. You know, when I'm sailing, I kind of feel how the boat wants lower check stay.
right.
If it's really windy or, you know, nice breeze, and I have to pull a lot of lower check stay on, that's a sign to me that maybe I have too much spreader sweep. The mast is bending too much.
Gotcha.
And when it's light, I don't get enough forestay sag, and the boat doesn't get enough power.
Yeah.
That's when I might need a little push the spreaders forward. You know, it restricts the middle of the mast. So, and by the same token, if it's light and I never touch the lower backstay, I'm trying to get the crew over the side. I've got a lot of power, but the forestay is not sagging enough. Then maybe the spreaders, you know, are too far forward. So that's my kind of general rule that I use when I'm sailing to determine how much, you know, because everybody knows, oh, you want to have 5 inches of sweep.
Right.
And that's true for the majority of the mast. But if you have a softer mast and you know, you're always pulling on the lower check stay, you might need to push them forward a little bit more than that. If you never touch it and the main is way too full in light air and you don't get enough forestay sag to power the jib up, you know, you probably got to sweep them back just a little bit. You know, just pop like half a turn off or something like that. It's usually the minimum that I do. Half a turn is usually half an inch, and that's quite a big change. And then I make that change so I can actually feel it. You know, if I do just a quarter turn or something, I'm probably not going to tell the difference. So those are my general rules of how I determine how much spreader sweep I use for each mast.
Good stuff.
One thing to, sorry, Prof, one thing to add on there is if you have the time and want to take the effort is, what I did in earlier days also is to get a little bit more knowledge about the spreader angle. You could also set it up unsymmetric, and you put like 14 and 125 on the other side, so you have a very straight and more bendy mast, and then you go out sailing and check from side to side what you see. That could be a good experience to understand the spreader angle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so good to do on a tuning day.
We've got this highly sophisticated technical Eric Doyle version 1.10 device. Eric, what's this fine item here on the screen now?
Yeah, we came up with this little gauge to help check the spreader sweep on all kinds of boats. You know, we use them in J24s and J70s and Etchels and things like that. And basically, it's just a little gauge. We usually hook it up with the jib halyard. On a starboat, you got to flip the jib halyard behind the spreaders. You feed this into the mast groove. You pull it up to spreader height. You have to tie a little line to the bottom so that it's nice and snug and it's solid. And then you can take your main halyard and hold it down at the gooseneck, and you can look up and tell how much spreader sweep you have in your boat when it's in the boat itself and all set. So we set it at our base setting, and then we can tell the difference between two masts. I was just in Miami. We did this. A friend of mine had a mast that was a little stiffer than mine. You know, after we did some deflections, and it showed the difference in the rigs. We had his mast is a little stiffer. He had 4.5 inches of sweep at 23.5 base tension, and my mast at base tension had 5 inches of pre-bend.
Gotcha.
So it's a little thing to tell you, the difference between boats, between masts. And on the other side of this, it's in millimeters for everybody who.
Perfect.
I was just about to ask that, Eric. We need version 1.2. We need also the metric system, not only.
We've got. I can show it to you. I got one right here.
Good stuff.
Here we go, Max.
There it is.
I love that. So that's version 1.2 already for me, Prof.
Absolutely.
Just for you. I'll send you one of these with metric on both sides.
The patent is pending. back to the shrouds again, and this slide here is just to do an overall comparison of the shroud lengths. Markus, what do we do there? What's the process there for doing that?
I mean, if you once you put the mast in the boat, basically the main goal is to have the mast straight in the boat and not leaning over to one side or the other. So what a good indication or a good first setup is, what I always would do on a new mast, is to check the actual length of both upper shrouds. So you know what you have. I mean, it's not always given that all these wires are the same length. Normally they are quite good, that's my experience, but they could vary, and they could vary also up to 8 millimeters. And that is something you should know before you step the mast in the boat, because you pull both, you connect the upper shrouds, both parts of the upper shrouds, lower and upper part, and then pull it down on the mast. I actually do it with a defined weight. I always use 25 kilos to pull them down, and then see if they are the same length. If they're the same length, fine, then you have what you want. If they are not, you should note it down and know that one side is shorter or longer than the other, and that you could then immediately adjust on the star masters once you have the mast in the boat, in order to have a straight mast.
So basically, you're effectively, Markus, calibrating the staymasters to take account of the fact that the shrouds might be not the same length one side compared to the other.
Yeah, I would actually add on this, do one add-on to this method. I would connect the upper shrouds to their actual staymasters, so take them off the boat, connect them to the shrouds, and then pull them down with the staymasters. And if they are same length, fine. If they are not, adjust the staymasters in this method on the mast, as long or until you have the same length on both star masters connected to the shrouds. Then you have your zero setting.
Then you have your zero setting, and then we're absolutely certain that everything is symmetric side to side. So the final bit, I guess, Eric, before we put the rig up, is just to set the forestay length, so we have some sort of a mast rake adjustment measurement. Is that right?
Yeah, we need a relative starting point. So we'll hook the forestay at the top of the mast. We'll lay it along the front of the mast, pull it nice and snug, and then, as you can see in the picture there with that little blue tape, we will mark where it intersects the top of the black band on the mast. So we'll do that, and normally you have to do that before the mast go through.
Before it goes up on the boat.
I would actually recommend not to use tape there, because tape, I mean, it depends on what tape you're using, but tape might or tend to slide up and down. Once you put the jib on the forestay, slide it up and down. My recommendation would be to use a marker pin, which actually has ink inside, and is a little bit like putting color on it, which stays a little bit longer. Also, this will be taken off by the jib, but it's staying better than tape in my.
I remember when I was sailing the Star, you could actually unwind the diform wire and then thread a little bit of thread in, and then it just closes around the thread, and then it stays there forever. So three little ways of marking that headstay. So so the final bit, I guess, here is we're going to put the rig in the boat, Eric. Is that the next step?
Now it's time. Yeah, we've got everything done that we need to do on shore with the rig down. Maybe put your Windex in. Now it's time to put it in the boat.
Always forget to put the Windex in.
Yeah, I always forget that. And then
why do you need a Windex at all?
All the help we can get, Markus.
Just put some indications on the shrouds. Nobody wants to look all the way up in the mast.
Gives the crew something to do when he's over the side, you know, looking up. You can look at the Windex, and sometimes it helps you tell the shear. And downwind, the crews like it. I'm with you. I don't use it, but my crew wants one, so we gotta keep the crews happy, as we know that, right?
That's the most important, Eric.
Exactly.
With Markus.
Say again, Prof.
The Windex is at eye level with you anyway.
Yeah, it is, but I don't like it at all. I like the indications on the shrouds, because the Windex is too high for me. You don't want to look up that high as a helmsman or as a crew, whatever. Upwind, I don't see any help from the Windex, but downwind on the shrouds is my favorite position.
Very good. So so the mast goes in the boat, lads, and which one? What's the order of checks that you do when you put the mast in the boat, Markus?
First of all, in my opinion, you always should make sure that you have the right rake, because the rake is influencing quite a lot. And it should be on standard rake, which is depending on what boat you're using to say that, because the old boats used to have the rake more forward, maybe on 92 or 920 millimeters, and the newer boats would maybe have a standard rake more or less around 950 millimeters. So once that is established, you can check all the other settings, because they are relating to the rake. And for me, the standard rake should be the point to start measuring, and that starts then with the lower shrouds should be positioned in front, just in front of the mast.
So just before we get off the rake there, Markus, so the rake measurement here that I'm just putting my lovely circle around, so that's measured from where the forestay goes into the deck up to the bottom of the tape mark. Isn't that correct?
Exactly. You measure to the deck, to your tape mark, and that is where also some difference come from, because the new boats have a lower part, the part of the deck is a little bit lower in the front. That's why you measure also a little bit more rake. Okay. But that's the only way you can measure, and that's why it's difference between boats.
Okay, and then lads, so is the next step then, Eric, the shrouds?
Yeah, we'll make sure the shrouds are in the right spot. Lower shrouds in line with the front of the mast, because we only want the lower shroud to really affect the side bend. And when you go upwind in the starboat, the mast bends a little bit. If we put the lower shroud at the very front edge, and the mast bends, it'll line up basically in the middle of the mast, and it will only affect the side bend. And then that also puts it in a good position for when we let the mast forward downwind, it stays loose enough. Some guys run the lower shrouds very tight. You know, I saw in the past some guys actually had to have high field levers on the lowers for downwind. But I like to keep them on the forward edge of the mast. And then the upper shroud goes about an inch and a half in front of that. Again, so that it has the proper geometry for going upwind. And downwind, when we let the mast forward, it goes quite slack, and it allows the mast to kind of float, allows the leeward side to get quite loose, doesn't affect the main quite so much.
That's really, it's really interesting what you say there about the lower shrouds being lined up with the front of the mast in the dock, and then obviously when the mainsail goes up and you sheet the main and the mast forward, then the spreaders and the mast bend, so they move forward. And then what you're saying, Eric, is that the lower shrouds effectively are side by side with the mast. So they're only controlling the side bend of the mast and not trying to pull it forwards or backwards when it's loaded.
Yeah, yeah. You know, then it's strictly side bend that we're controlling. We're not doing fore and aft, doing everything funky going on. And this is also a good time too, when you put the upper shrouds on, you know, and you get the mast to pop back. You know, you can stand back from the boat and maybe, you know, 8 or 10 feet and line up the upper shrouds at the bottom. And then, you know, again, close one eye and you can sight up the mast. And the one shroud should hide the other one all the way up to the spreaders. And that also tells you that you've done a good job of getting the squareness, you know, when we were adjusting sweep of the spreaders. You know, we want them to sit in the boat so that they're, you know, the one shroud hides the other one. And then we know that we're going to have the same exact bend on the mast side to side.
Good stuff. Just
and then
a question from the chat group there from Nick Madigan. And this may have been from your reference to the change in shape of the bow, but Nick is asking, how do you define, Markus, specifically new versus old boats, you know, when we're talking about different settings and stuff?
Yeah, I was reading that question too. It is a very nice question, but it's also very hard to answer, to be honest, because it changed a lot in the boats and in the setups of the boats. Because one thing I was saying before, the shape or the line of the deck in the bow is in new boats a little bit lower in the bow, so that is one reason they might use a little bit more rake there for the measurements, and the older boats were more on 920 millimeters. The second very important or the big change, in my opinion, is the position of the keel and also the positioning of the mast. But because in the newer version boats, the keel is more or less moved forward all the way or maximum, and that is also then affecting the mast step, because that has to be more forward then too. So there's a lot of changes between new and old boats, and all of them more or less have their own measurements. For example, if you go in older follies like 10 years ago, they would use 4,490 millimeters as a standard mast step position, but now in the new follies, everything moved more forward. And when the keel is going forward, the mast has to go forward. Don't you agree, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember years ago, I was just kind of in and out of the class, and I bought a boat, and all of the keels, as far as I knew, they were all maxed back. And I bought a boat, I think it was 8153. And one day the coach a Swiss coach walked by, and he said, "Well, where's the keel on that boat?" And I said, "Well, the keel's max aft." Well, it wasn't. I didn't know. I hadn't measured it. I was just kind of sailing. It was actually max forward, so it was all screwed up. I was really struggling because I had the mast butt in the same spot. You know, I get people that will call me up sometimes and say, you know, I bought this 80,000 series boat, and I went through the tuning guide, and you know, the boat was always fast. That's why I bought it, and I moved the mast butt, you know, 2 holes to match the tuning guide, and you know, God, I'm really slow and I'm struggling. And I said, well, what'd you change? And he said, well, the mast butt. And I said, well, yeah, the boat's going to find out where it wants the mast butt to be. You know, put it back where it was. You know, the tuning guide is a starting point, and it's a bit like everything else. You know, if it's got to match the balance point of the boat. So, you know, if the boat often is struggling and it's jammed up and you got too much power, could be the mast butt's too far back, you know, so you need to move it forward a little bit. And then if it's, you know, you can also kind of fine tune it. Mine lives at a certain spot 90% of the time. And then if it's really extreme conditions, really, really light, I'll move it back a little, just one hole, gives me a little more pre-bend, gives the boat a little more helm, helps me out. But you got to be, you know, I only move one hole. It'll probably be better 2 holes, but then if the wind comes up, I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to have too much helm. The boat's going to be too helmy. So then if it's, you know, one of those days where it's like 20 knots, it's going to blow all day, it's going to be really windy, I'll move the mast butt forward 1 hole. That helps stiffen the section of the mast, which we need on the Star boat, because the Star has a very small mast. It's very bendy. This helps to free the boat up helm-wise, lets the boat go through the water, and you know, that's about the extent of what I do. But
so that sort of range there of 4560 to 4580 millimeters.
Yep.
So that's a 20 millimeter range. Obviously, when you move the butt forward 1 hole, how much is that, Eric, in millimeters? Do you know?
Yeah, it's like I want to say it's like 12, 15 mils. It's not a ton, but it definitely makes a difference, you know.
Yeah.
And the thing to, you know, we'll talk about the rake a little bit here shortly too, but you know, the important thing we're trying to get across today is that you know, one of the important things is that we have a starting point, you know, that we know where our mast butt is, we know where our rake is, and then we can check the shroud tension and the positions and all that. And okay, this is where we start.
Gotcha.
And then, you know, we come out the end of the day, we've sailed all day, and we say, hey, you know, how did we do? Did we, you know, where were we fast? Where were we slow? You know, would you agree, Markus? You know, you kind of can fine tune after that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the mast butt is very important, but also if you buy a boat, I would normally recommend to, first of all, stay with the settings you have there if nobody fucked it up badly or something before. But normally the mast butt is something, if you want to touch it, you have to be sure that something is wrong. I mean, otherwise you mess the whole system up a little bit too much. But as you say, the more experience you get, and I would actually, I'm doing the same, that in certain conditions you can play with your mast butt. But that is something you should only do if you understand the whole rest of the system. Yeah. Because as you say, if you move it too much, you can be distracted or everything. So that is kind of
the rake, Markus.
Again?
Getting onto the rake, so because the rake is you know, probably something that we need to be very accurate on, isn't it?
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, the rake is very important for the balance in the boat. That is something the rake is having a big influence. The more you rake back, the more weather ham you will get on the boat. Well, not exactly right, because there's a point when the boom touches the deck, you could not tighten the main sheet more, and then you open the leech. So that is why you actually rake back in light conditions to get weather ham, and very light, or you rake back in very breezy conditions to open the leech and get rid of your power in the boat. And in between, you want to have it on standard setting, so you have you have the ability to tighten the leech, to get pointing. In general, I would say in an ideal world, the rake would also always be set so the boom can be tight all the way down to the deck and the leech tension is okay. But that would mean you would have to adjust the rake all the time. So you need to find a good middle setting, right, Eric?
It's interesting, Eric, that the sometimes in sailboats, you almost do similar things in very light air and very heavy air, isn't it?
Yeah, like yeah, exactly.
With Markus was saying there with the rake, you rake back in the light stuff to open the leech, potentially to flatten the main a bit. And but obviously if you've got too much rake in medium airs, then you can't close the leech. Right.
You're exactly right, Prof. We kind of want to do the same thing in again, we're talking about extreme conditions. You know, when it's very, very light air, there's not enough pressure to really stretch the sail, right? We're dealing with a light Dacron cloth. You know, the sail has to be quite full so that when it stretches out into a proper shape, when it's loaded, that it often ends up quite full in very, very light air. So when we rake back in light, you know, everybody too, this is extreme, all right? This is like 3 to 5 knots. The leeward shroud's not gonna come loose, so the shroud tension is gonna put a lot of pre-bend into the mast, and that's good because that helps flatten the main, it helps open up the head. So if we throw a little more rake in, that as the mast goes back, since the upper shrouds are well in front of the mast, that adds shroud tension, it adds pre-bend. And if we pull the mast butt back too, that adds more pre-bend. So now we've got the sail flat enough in light air, we can sheet it without the head closing down. But we got to be careful when we do this because very, very quickly in 6 knots, 8 knots, you know, we're looking for power now. The sail is starting to stretch. The top is starting to open up. It's starting to get too open. We want to sheet hard. Well, if we got the rake back, we can't sheet. The boom hits the deck. Yeah. So we got to pull the rake forward. And then there's that condition we're trying to get the crew over the side as quickly as we can. That requires a lot of main sheet tension. You know, like if we look at this picture here, it's my friend Benny Mitchell sailing San Diego, typical San Diego condition, flat water, 8, 10 knots. You know, we're trying to close that upper leach. We're trying to get the boom down on the deck, but close the top leach. So the rake's got to go forward because otherwise it'll, like Markus said, it's just on the deck. We can't trim any harder. So we got the rake, you know, even as far forward as 920. And then we can trim the main hard enough and the boat will point very nicely and we can go. Now, when it gets extreme again, over 20 knots, we got plenty of power. We got tons of power. We want the top of the mast, the sail to twist open. So we might add rake again to get the top open, to allow the boat to go through the water. Then we can, when we trim the main sheet down, the bottom is correct, but the head is quite twisted and open. What's the furthest back you ever go when it's really windy, Markus? Or what's your range in rake today?
To talk about modern boats, I'm sailing on at the moment. So the new version boats, I play between 90, 95 and 99, maybe 1 meter actually. So that's quite a big range I'm using. I'm a big fan of using rake, but it is, you need some experience to play that. That's not easy. So having a standard rake is maybe sometimes more helpful if you don't know what you're doing.
Good stuff, guys. So, so we talked about the rake and then just the general setup for getting your shrouds at the correct tensions. Markus, what's the procedure here for getting those set up correctly?
Yeah, so basically we checked everything on the mast. We know that where we are with the length of the upper shrouds. We know where we are with the rake, and we also checked maybe at least once where our mast step is. Then the mast is in the boat, and we set up the upper backstays with 5 on the loose gauge, and then just check that not the mast is inverted, so the wrong way around. It has to be with the spreaders back. And there should be no tension on the mast controller or puller, whatever you want to call it, because that is also affecting the reading you would have on the upper shrouds. If that is pulled, you would read less or lower numbers on the gauge. And then basically you just change from the upper backstays to the upper shrouds with the loose gauge, and check what you have. And the base setting could be or should be something around 23.5, 24. Well, yeah, something there. Depends a little bit on how stiff your mast is, but that is a good base setting.
Good stuff. And what about you, Eric? Is that similar for you? Is that 23.5 the sort of standard, or do people change it?
Yeah, it's a good starting point. You know, it's tough to go wrong at that. If you have a stiffer mast and you want to keep the same pre-bend, you're going to need more cap shroud tension. Softer masts, they can't handle as much compression. They tend to get out of column easier. So they might, you know, your base tension might be a little bit softer on that, maybe 22.5. But we want to have something that we start the day with. And I try and I get back to the dock, whatever I've done during the day, I just reverse it. And I always start with the mast butt in the same spot, rake in the same spot, shroud tension at 23.5. And that's how I try and leave the dock every day. So that I know where I am.
That's a very good point, Eric, when you get in from sailing, just to reset your rig back to your base numbers.
So maybe you didn't change anything, it's fine, but a lot of times we're changing the shrouds and we kind of have it written down what the numbers are on the staymasters, and you know, maybe you had the crew do it during the race and he got confused or something like that. So always double check everything, set it back at the end of the day. Then the next morning you go to the boat and you know where you are and you know what you might do during the day according to the forecast.
Very good. All right, guys. So before we go sailing, final step, Markus?
Yeah, that's the one thing we're missing is the lower shrouds. start this, or to make a point just in front before we set this. This is a base setting, and in my opinion, yes, you can set it up on the shore, but you will never have the right setting by doing it like this way. You always have to check it once you're out. But to get at least a number or a point to start from, it's good to measure up from the black band you have on the mast. You measure up 915 millimeters and make a mark on the mast there. And then on this height, you can take a shock cord and connect the lower shrouds and put some tension on it, something like 5 to 10 kilos. And then you take a measurement tape and measure the distance basically between the lower shrouds. And these readings could be something like 700 to 740 millimeters, depending a little bit on what you want to achieve. I mean, the tighter the lowers are getting, the bigger the distance is. So that means it will flatten the main, depower the boat, and the looser they are, so the smaller the distance is, the more power you will have as a general thinking or setup about this.
Great stuff. So I just seen a question there, a J24 question. So I've just contacted Gwen there on the webinar privately. Gwen, if you just want to drop us a note, we can get somebody from one of our J24 guys to contact you. But Eric, I see your response there, Eric, about adjusting the rake during the race. So like if you felt, what would be a reason why you might want to drop more rake into the boat during a race, Eric? What would you sense, and what would be the reason that you'd need to do that?
Usually if it gets a lot windier, suddenly, we've started the race and halfway up the beat, it gets a lot windier and my boat's got too much power. I'm too jammed up. I can't put the bow down. My sail's as flat as I can get. Then I might reach down and let the rake back a little bit and just free the boat up and let it run. And likewise, if I feel I can't trim hard enough, the breeze died from 18 to 10 and the rake was back a little bit and I've got the main sheet down on the deck and I can't get enough upper leech tension, then it's pretty hard to pull it forward on the beat, but on the run, I might pull it forward. I've got just like 4 marks on my rake line in the boat. So I might pull it forward 1 or 2 lines, and that allows me to trim a little harder during the next beat.
Very good.
Yeah, like Eric says, I mean, for me, there are some points in the race where it could be necessary or critical to change it. One thing is before the start, we all know that out of the start you want to have height, and if you go into the start with maybe too much rake and you can't pull it up, that could be a major one. Yeah, so it is always easier to go with a little bit more upright mast in the start and then let it back in the race once you feel you're free and you have a free lane. And the second thing is you should always check on the end of the runs, am I fine with the rake? Do I want to pull it more upright? Do I want to change it? And that is always a good point to check in the race, how you want to set up your rake.
Gotcha. Good stuff, guys. So finally, a picture of a boat with a sail up. So what we have here are just obviously the back end of the mainsail, the clew area, outhauls really tight, and the booms sheeted really, really close to the deck. And that whole main sheet block area at the back of the boat, Markus, obviously the blocks are exerting a lot of force there. So is there something about where those blocks are positioned on the boom, and what effect does changing the position of the blocks on the boom, what effect does it have on the setup?
Yeah, there is a plate in the boom with different holes, so that gives you the ability to move the blocks forward and backwards. And there are 2 blocks coming from the boom and 1 block on the deck. But once you sheet it in all the way, that means that is a defined position. And then if this is not neutral, because the blocks are too far forward on the plate compared to your mast position, then it will pull the whole mast over the main sheet back and creates a very full mainsail, which could slow you down or let the boat feel like it always wants to pinch and is not really want to going forward. On the other way, if the blocks are too far back in this setting on the boom plate, then it could push the whole mast forward, creates a pre-bend, which maybe ends up in lack of height or having not any ability to point. So that is very important once your mast step position is fixed, that this is a neutral setting, because it's a big influence on the bottom part of the main.
I would imagine that, you know, that little triangle of the block on the deck and the two blocks in the boom, when the main sheet is pulled in tight, I mean, that's locked in very firmly, isn't it? So
it is, yeah, it is.
Forward or the blocks are back, it pushes the boom forward, it pushes the back. So yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, it's another reason why I don't move the mast butt more than one hole. You know, if you move it a couple of holes, you're really changing that geometry, and you might not accomplish what you want.
Right.
You might do the opposite.
Got it. Good stuff. All right, guys. So we're finally going sailing, and a wonderful picture of a star going upwind there in what looks like pretty strong conditions. So, we've left the dock and we're sailing out to the race course. So what do we do, Eric, in terms of like on the water tuning before the start of the race? Because presumably we've gone out with our standard setup that we've just got through. What are the steps that you go through before the race in terms of optimizing the tune for that day's conditions?
Yeah, like Markus said, we get a number on our lowers, but it's very rarely exactly what we want it to be, you know. So I like to go upwind, get the boat feeling really good. Then I ease the main sheet about an inch. I hand the hiking stick to my crew, and I go forward and I sight up the mast. And the first thing I check is see how hard it's laying against the partners. You know, this is very contingent on the lower tension, well, and the upper tension as well, but it should be laying, you know, kind of firm against the lowers, but I should be able to pull with my hand and have it just come up off the partners. If it's floating in the partners, then that means, you know, there's uppers, the lowers are probably going to be way too tight, and this might work when it's very windy, but in a situation where you're looking for power, it's going to be too tight, you know. So it should, if it's pinned against it very, very hard, it's going to do two things. It's either going to give you too much sag, or if it's really, you know, too loose, then the mast is going to be restricted there, and it's kind of get what Markus calls an S bend in it, you know, and you're going to need to tighten it a little bit. So we want to look up the back edge of the mast, and the mast should have a nice even curve, you know, should be very straight in most conditions. If we're looking for power, we want a little sag. And if we've got the intermediates loose, we're looking for sag, that's nice. If it's really windy, we want a little bit straighter. But I usually like to start with it very straight, and then I can go from there and sail the boat a little bit and tell whether I want more power or less power is where I start. But we want to get it straight, and the most important thing is even side to side. You know, so we'll look at it on one tack, see what we want to do, we'll tack over, look at it again on the other tack, and then make the adjustments and check it out again. Is that kind of the way you look at it, Markus?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in total, yes. But the one thing is you should, I mean, the adjustment is basically on the lowers, yes. But you should not forget the upper shrouds, because if they are too loose, and that's what I call an S-curve, if they are too loose and you want to establish a straight or maybe even a hooking mast to leeward, then you come to a point where the deck is pushing the mast in the bottom part to windward because the upper shrouds are too loose. And then the mast looks super strange. And in this case, you have to straighten or put the mast more upright or more in the middle of the boat by the uppers. Before then, you can play the lowers in a certain way or in a certain range. But if the uppers are wrong or too loose or too tight, you don't have this range on the lowers.
Got it. Got it.
So Markus, how if it's windy, how much tighter do you go on your, or what are the adjustments you make to your shrouds, or you recommend to the skipper when say it's blowing 18 knots, it's pretty windy?
Yeah, it's always depending. I mean, this is something I just tried to explain before. It's a little bit depending on how much pressure you have on deck level. If you feel the pressure is too big there on deck level, that could help you to flatten the main out. But if it's not looking like a harmonic line and it's going to be a little bit S-curved, you need to tighten the uppers. I normally would go from the standard setting. I would do a full turn on the uppers, maybe 1.5 turn on the uppers to tighten. In the same, then if I tighten the uppers 1 turn, I would tighten the lowers one phase. That is normally what I'm looking for. The other way around, if it's lighter, loosening the uppers by 1 turn means also loosening the lower shrouds by 1 phase on the turn pin there. That is something which works out quite well for me. But once again, there is different styles. People tend to go in very high numbers sometimes in the breeze, up to 27, 28 on the upper shrouds. So you have to look at it, at your system and how that is. So there shouldn't be too much pressure on deck level, and that is affected by uppers too.
Good stuff, guys. Right. So this magnificent shot here, I guess, is the reason why we've gone through all that rigor and accuracy. And what we have here is the star mainsail, the North M25 star main. I'm sure, Eric, you had a lot to do with this design. And I suppose as sail designers, this is your classic sail design picture where we use it to analyze the sail shape. So what are we looking at here when we look up this M25 mainsail?
Yeah, we've done our homework. We've gotten out on the water. We've done our rig tune, our intermediates, and sweep and everything. And this to me looks really nice. It's a nice balanced sail, top to bottom. The proportions, if we talk about the draft stripes, the lower, the middle, and the upper, they look all very similar. There's no strange part of the sail. It's not super flat in the bottom or way twisty in the top. The sail's trimmed nicely. We can see the telltale on the second batten down is flowing. The one at the top is just disappeared behind the batten, so it's trimmed properly. We've got nice overbend wrinkles that are even in the bottom of the sail, and they go all the way up past the mid stripe. So this to me looks like a very nice setup. It's powerful. It's full. Lower leach isn't too tight. I think, you know, that's a good, happy starting point. I'm ready to go next to one of my tuning partners and start sailing and see how the boat's going through the water and seeing how it feels.
Good stuff. And the draft stripes specifically, Markus, I mean, do you kind of look at all 3 of them, or is there one that you look at before the other, or what way do you use them?
I mean, I don't look all the time at the draft stripes. The tailtails in the sail, especially in the top of the sails, and the tailtails at the leach of the sails is very important in the permanent adjustment of the mainsail to me. But of course, once you put out the main and you want to look at it, you look at the draft stripes, and they need to be kind of harmonic. And this is what I found in the M25, and what I also found is it's a little bit easier to set up for me than the M16. Not saying the M16 was a bad sail, but it needed a little bit more the right settings, and the M25 seems to be easier to use if you don't have everything completely right. So that's my impression, which is very good for a sail. And then obviously, I mean, the draft stripes will change a lot by using the check stay, maybe the bottom one by the outhole. But nice work you're doing here, Prof. Yeah. the way you could measure the draft and the twist and everything. But it's not,
It's interesting.
It has to be harmonic.
Yeah, well, it's just, I just put them in there just to give our sailing friends who are looking an idea that as you go up the sail, you know, the profile of the sail twists open, and as you go up the sail, and as sail designers, we would use this in our design software to analyze the sail shape of the sail. So I just thought it might be useful to know.
Yeah, that's nice.
So what about the jib then, guys? I mean, we haven't really specifically looked at any jib setup because we're focused on the mast and the mainsail. So Markus, I reckon you pulled in the jib once or twice in your time. So maybe you might chat through a bit of this.
Yeah, I did. And it is a lot of adjustments needed there, to be honest. I mean, I'm not a friend of having a fixed jib lead point or something. One thing which needs to be measured and also marked is the in and outboard position, which is more or less 35.5 centimeters from the middle of the mast, like front edge of the mast to the jib lead point. That is a setting which should be visible and always be able to be reproduced all the time. So you need to know that setting, and maybe in breezy conditions you want to let it go outboard a little bit more, but more or less the whole time this is a setting you need to have all the time. And then jib lead fore and aft, that is now, you can measure it by 220, 218. That depends a little bit also on the jib, and then also how high you drive the jib. So what I would always do is look at the jib and the conditions, and then in light conditions you might want to have the jib lead a little further forward to create a little bit more power. In very strong conditions, you might want to go back a little bit to open the leech. This is, depending also on the model of jib you have, but it needs to be adjusted all the time you're out there. That is what I would do. And
I suppose, Eric, ultimately with the jib lead, you're really trying to kind of find that balance between having enough depth in the bottom of the jib that there's enough power, but not having too much depth so that it's draggy. You might just talk to us a little bit just about the shape of the jib here in the picture, Eric, and relate that to the lead position.
Yeah, a lot of boats nowadays, you know, mine included, I don't actually have a fore and aft adjustment. My track for in and out is bolted to the deck, you know, at that 7 feet 2.5 inch mark for when it's 14 outboard. It's bolted there. So effectively to move the lead, you know, I have to change the height of the jib up and down. So as we pull the jib up, it effectively moves the lead forward. Lets us tighten the leech more with the same sheet tension. If I lower the jib, it effectively moves the lead aft. Allows you to stretch the foot of the jib more, and you have to trim harder to get the same leech tension. This jib's trimmed quite nicely. I really like it where the lead position is. This to me looks like the standard position where you are 80% of the time. You know, the jib blocks are 1 inch apart. The jib leech is trimmed nicely. It's right at the mark on the spreader, which is, you know, 18 inches out. And then the foot of the jib is just starting to get flat. You know, we need to be able to trim the jib hard enough in a puff when the sail stretches and opens up. We might have to trim it a click or two just to keep the leech in the same spot, and the foot doesn't get so flat that it's flapping.
Yeah.
And when the pressure goes away and the leech comes in a little bit, or we tighten the lower check stay a little bit, we might have to ease the jib just a touch. But to me, that's a nicely trimmed jib, nice even vertical twist profile, and I like the flatness on the foot. It's flat water there, it looks like, so a nice flat jib. It's very nice. Ends up looking like that. Very sweet sail.
Is this, guys, Markus, what sail is this? This lovely radial cut jib.
It's a J115 radial.
Yeah.
One of the more or less quite new sales in our program. It is very nice and smooth to use. It's very durable from my experience. And there's the second jib, the J7, which is a little bit more powerful or a little bit deeper in the entry, which gives you more steerage if it's very wavy. But this is a very good all-round jib, if you ask me. And one thing which I wanted to add on the jib lead and the jib trim a little bit is that you always have to make sure that the top tentacle, which we can see here also in the top of the picture, is flying. And if this is stalling, you're too tight on the leech or too tight or too much forward on the jib lead point, and that will slow you down dramatically. Once this one is stalling completely, you have to adjust something, because that is not giving you enough power forward or punch. I don't know what you feel, Eric, but for me, this always needs to be flying the jib tentacle, the top one.
Yeah, it's flying nicely in this picture. It might be just slightly under trim there because we're not quite at the mark. You know, this is a good accelerating trim. You know, you come out of attack. You know, all the mains have the spreader window there, as we can see, Prof, back on the mainsail, and it's lined up really nicely for the skipper when he's hiking hard to be able to look up and see the jib trim. So, you know, we try to come out of the tack with the jib at, you know, 90–95%. And once the boat's up to speed, you know, the skipper has the best angle. He's back and he's looking through that and he can see the spreader. And I'll usually call for, you know, okay, I feel like the boat's up to speed. We got max trim here. So I'll trim the main in those 2 clicks. Crew will trim the jib in. Maybe if I feel like we're still going well, we'll trim it a little harder. We might even be inside that mark a little bit. You know, we might be an inch or so if the telltale's still flying, like Markus says. And if we can trim that hard and we go a little higher and we go good speed, we'll do that. But definitely it's got to be flowing, you know, 99% of the time. Good
stuff, guys. Great stuff. So I suppose it's probably time to wrap up, guys. We've probably gone a little bit over an hour and a quarter, but it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion about star rig tune and the setup of the mainsail and the setup of the jib. Any final thoughts from you, Markus, in 30 seconds?
No, it's I mean, I know it's always a pain in the ass to do all this rig tune we've been talking about the last hour, and probably you rather want to have a beer instead of fumbling around with your mast and everything. But I strongly recommend to at least take half of the time and do something on it and know where you are, and then have your beer later. I mean, combine it both, or have a beer while you rig your mast, which could be a good option. But know where you are and know how you can reproduce your settings. I mean, once you're out there and you're fast, or you know you were fast this day, but you don't know why you were fast, it's kind of frustrating if you can't repeat it. So this is why I always recommend to check it and then have your beer.
Great. Thanks, Markus. And you, Eric?
Yeah, I think that's important. We got to have a starting point. We got to know where it is. And then at the end of the day, I think hopefully this gave you some ideas of, you can talk about it with your crew. You know, how are we going today? Oh gosh, when it was, you know, our discussion often goes, you know, in the lulls, we really seem to excel or hold on, but when it was breezy, you know, it was hard and the boat felt bound up, or like the other way, it was really fast. In the puffs, you know, we seemed to really scoot forward. The boat felt great, but in the lighter sections, we just couldn't get the crew over the side quick enough, and we were underpowered. So hopefully this gave you some ideas of how to address what your weaknesses are, or some condition you want to play towards. And one last thing I want to mention, Brad Nickel was a big winner. He came forth first with the answer to the Lowell North Star history trivia question. He was correct in that Lowell won the Worlds 5 times, which is remarkable. He won the 4 times as a skipper and 1 time as a crew. He was 15 years old. He was crewing for another very famous sailor from San Diego, Malin Burnham, and I think it was 1945. First time he won the Star World. It's pretty incredible.
Fantastic.
Oh, and the crew in the picture. I didn't see anybody come up with that. That was pretty hard to dig up. He's maybe we can go back to that picture.
Yeah. Hold on a second now. Let me.
The gentleman's name was Jim Hill. Jim Hill. I don't know much about Jim.
I have to correct you there, Eric. That's James Hill.
James. Well, it's a different name. You know, you can James or Jim whenever you're in the United States. But what I was very impressed with is that this picture is probably from the early 1960s, and he's rocking some pretty cool sunglasses for that time. He's kind of got some little bit of Terminator look about him. That's pretty good.
Good stuff.
So hopefully we'll do another one of these, and we'll continue with the Lowell North trivia, because he was such a legend in our class.
Perfect. Well, guys, I just want to say thank you so much, Eric and Markus. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Prof did a great job. Hopefully we'll get anybody who wants to email questions in. We can address them on the next one. We'll do something. We'll do another webinar if everyone's interested. We'll talk more about sailing on the water, upwind and downwind, and things like that. And you guys have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Markus. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Prof, for having us and guiding us through this show. See you all
no problem.
later.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining in.
Bye-bye.